With Lords of the Fallen 2 being somewhere out in 2026, that doesn't mean we're not getting any new information, and if you've been staying up to date with what CI Games is doing, every so often they release a Lifting the Veil podcast episode where they talk all about what they're currently doing for Lords of the Fallen 2, and a few days ago we just got the next episode. The episode is around 41 minutes, but I'm condensing everything important that they said and putting it down into an 8 to 10 minute video so you guys don't have to sit there and watch the entire thing. However, if you do want to do that, I will leave it down in the description below linked so you can go check out their YouTube channel. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into all the new things that we've found out. First and foremost, this episode was focused on the world of Axiom and just how big it's going to be. The entire episode talked about the different factions, it talked about the different areas, how everything is going to have a linear feel to it. However, there will be many different areas within the game, 4 to be exact, where you can go and find out more about these factions in this very heavy lore-driven world that CI Games is working on. Now, one of the things I really want to focus on right off the bat is what they said when it comes to the size of Mornstead. Now, what we are to understand is that in Lords of the Fallen 2023, we were pretty much in Axiom the entire time. Well, they put it pretty bluntly when they said Axiom is just one very small portion of Mornstead, basically like a county within a bunch of countries. And in Lords of the Fallen 2, they have said that there's going to be 4 massive biomes for you to explore. Each one of these biomes is going to have a different faction in it, and that leads me to ask so many questions that we don't have answers to yet. But the fact that there's going to be factions could mean that there are 4 different factions of enemy types that you're going to be fighting, or there's actually 4 factions that you can ally with and make your way through all 4 of these new biomes that Lords of the Fallen 2 is going to give us access to. Now, something else that I found very interesting in the interview or podcast they just released was the fact that not only is Mornstead much bigger and has all these split up factions, but Umbral will reflect that, meaning Umbral is going to look different in each one of these 4 areas of Lords of the Fallen 2 that we're going to explore. I think it's incredible that not only is the CI Games dev team doing a ton of work on the overworld, so to speak, of Mornstead, but they're also focusing a ton on Umbral, meaning it's not going to be just that hue of gray and blue that we had in Lords of the Fallen 2023. Now, something else that I wanted to correct from my last video, or that they have corrected in social media, is that Lords of the Fallen 2 is not taking place 100 years in the future, rather it's taking place 1,000 years in the future, which is going to be very, very apparent in how the world itself is put together. Now, one thing the dev team really wanted to harp on and make sure that we understood is that they are still doing a very dark fantasy feel, meaning just because there's going to be these 4 really big biomes to discover and explore doesn't mean that it's going to deter from that dark fantasy feel. Now, they did say that it's going to be a little more lighter and lighthearted in certain places of the game, instead of everything being doom and gloom and never seeing the sun like you did in Lords of the Fallen 1. However, with those areas of rest and peace within the game, they also said that we should never trust anything that we see with our eyes. There will be parts of the game where we will perceive a vestige that is coming up and we'll start to let our guard down. However, they have said that we definitely shouldn't do that, as they are going to try to trap us and trick us any chance they get. They don't want the player to become too comfortable within Mornstead, and they want to harp on the fact that there is danger around every turn. Even if you come to an overlook that's absolutely gorgeous, there could be enemies very, very close. Or for example, if you're in a dark underground cave and you see a light beaming through the ceiling onto a place that looks peaceful, never let your guard down. Switching gears a little bit here, the next topic that the devs at CI Games talked about when it comes to Lords of the Fallen 2 is how lore-heavy Lords of the Fallen 2 is going to be. There was a good amount of lore in Lords of the Fallen. However, in Lords of the Fallen 2, you are going to be able to pick up on the lore through so many different sources. Whether it's lore of old ancient factions that were once in the world that are no longer there, based on the architectural designs of the different biomes that you're entering, or whether it's in an NPC's dialogue, or whether it's in items and certain item descriptions, the lore is going to be very abundant in the world and it will be very in your face at times, so you always know what's going on and you'll have a great understanding of the world of Lords of the Fallen 2 as a whole. Now, I think this is absolutely fantastic. I love lore in video games, especially dark fantasy games like the Dark Souls series, or now in this case, Lords of the Fallen. The more lore, the better, as that helps me get lost and immersed in the worlds of Lords of the Fallen, and I definitely cannot wait to see what they're cooking up. Now, amongst these larger stories we're going to be following, there are also going to be a ton of smaller stories to keep players engaged and just put another level into the lore that the dev team is building for Lords of the Fallen 2. The team also said that they were so focused on the lore that even if you don't listen to NPCs and focus in on them, you're definitely still going to know what's going on based on all the things that I just described. And what they have talked about in the interview is this is definitely going to be a much more lore-rich game than Lords of the Fallen 23 was. Now, something else that was stated that I thought was very, very interesting about the factions that we talked about previously is the fact that you will actually get different weapon designs, armor designs, and architectural designs based on the biomes that you enter. So what does that mean? Well, one of the things that the devs were talking about was that it is possible to get different looking weapons based on whatever faction area you are in. I think this is phenomenal. It definitely breaks up not only that dark fantasy kind of claymore feel of a weapon, but it can also bring some culture and once again some lore into the game of these previous civilizations or these other civilizations or factions within Mornstead, telling a different story with the weapons that you can attain there. Plus, the more weapons we have in Lords of the Fallen 2 as well as armor sets, the better in my opinion. But I thought that was a very interesting takeaway, that we won't be getting the same type of weapons in the entire game, but they will be broken up into different faction types at times. And finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about from the interview is the level design that the CI Games dev teams are working on. If you're familiar with Lords of the Fallen 23 at all, when 2.0 came out and there was a ton of problems fixed, they introduced the Umbral Guidance System, which allowed players to know exactly where they needed to go in order to get to the next area of the game. Now, with Lords of the Fallen 2, during player testing, they are actually not implementing that system for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, they want to make sure that the levels they are designing are easily navigated or easy to navigate without the game telling you exactly where to go. They've learned from areas like Forsaken Fen in 2023 being incredibly hard to navigate and needing something like that. However, if they can manage to pull off solid level design without the Umbral Guidance System, it may still be something that they implement right before release, but they don't want their level designs to require players to use that guidance system. Rather, they want that guidance system there just as a crutch if players absolutely need it. But the way the dev team is approaching it this time is the game should be linear enough with enough exploration to get to your next area with not just relative ease, but a trajectory that actually makes sense. So the Umbral Guidance System would not be 100% necessary. But guys, that is going to be it for everything that I found incredibly interesting from the Lords of the Fallen podcast that just came out a few days ago. Once again, I will link it down in the description below if you would like to go check out the full 41-minute podcast and listen to every single thing that the devs are saying. And one thing I didn't cover in this video is some of the questions they answered from fans at the end of their video, so definitely go check that out. But make sure before you do to like and subscribe on this video to keep up to date with all things news related, Lords of the Fallen, Souls-like, and everything in between. Also, if you're wondering why there's no camera here, it's because my camera has broken and I am waiting on another one in the mail. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching until the end of the video. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comment sections below and I will do my best to answer them as well as I can. And until next time, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.